from the Super League Grand Final all the way across the channel to France now.
Yeah, so we spoke to Liam Duffy, who is a coaching consultant in Elite 1 and Elite 2 in France, although the league has actually had a rebrand, but we'll get into that anyway. Here's the call. But best place to start is, how did you end up in the south of France and how did you get involved in coaching?
Well, I think I was living in London around like COVID times and stuff like that, and as you know, there's not a huge amount of rugby league in London. And then just after the back of lockdowns, I was just playing like amateur rugby league in London. Although like for a few of the teams there, it's actually quite a good level for all people kind of look down on London Rugby League. Once you like I said, look at the top few teams.
Who was you involved with in London? Because we've covered quite a few sides in London this year.
Yeah, at the time I was playing for Chargers, so they're in Southwest London. So yeah, I would say it's a bit of a tri-nations. There's them; they're kind of mostly Brits, with a smattering of Aussies and Kiwis. Like there are a lot of like guys who came down from up north or students who like discovered rugby league at uni, who make up the Chargers. Then you got Hammersmith, who are mainly Australians. Yeah. Then you got West Warriors, who are mainly Kiwis. So it's a bit of a tri-nations. But once you get those three teams in the mix, like it can be a really good level and a bit of a rivalry. So yeah, I was involved with them and actually suffered a concussion making a tackle, which before that I thought that concussions were you just had a bit of a headache for a couple of days, but the symptoms lasted a long time. Yeah. It's what's known as like post-concussion syndrome. So I just kind of like got further and further away from being able to play, and like the seasons matching up, as you know, over there. The seasons in the summer. So I thought, maybe I'll be able to play like time my comeback for the French Rugby League season, which starts in September. And after COVID and stuff, like I just decided that I was kind of done with London. So, but I also wanted to get back involved in rugby league. So my choice was move back up north or move to the south of France. When the south of France seemed a little bit more appealing to me, I'm sure you can understand. Yeah. So I went for that. Just contacted a few different clubs and said, look, I'm not asking for anything. I'm injured at the moment, but I'll help coach whoever you need, like kids. First team, whatever, second team, I don't care. Like, I'll just come and coach, and when I'm ready to play, I'll play. And I was honest with them. I said, I'm not a superstar, but I'll make as many tackles as I can in a match, and that's what you'll get out of me. So yeah, a couple of clubs came back, and I settled on one, came over to coach with them, and then since then started an initiative that was focused on like tackle technique and contact skills, Tackle University, and I do coaching. I did get back playing, but kind of left that behind now and just focusing on the coaching. So I'm coaching with a few different clubs, doing a bit of strength and conditioning, but also kind of really specialising in on tackle technique and contact skills.
What are some of the things about French Rugby League that someone, in the UK wouldn't be aware of?
I think that people would be quite surprised by the level, not necessarily in terms of, there's quite a few players knocking about who've played like Super League, NRL in the top French division, or Queensland Cup, New South Wales Cup. I think a comp like New South Wales Cup or Queensland Cup is going to be probably like a bit faster and more technical, but French Rugby League can be really physical. And I think that's where it has its edge. And I think people are kind of surprised by that. And this is not meant to be a negative point or a knock on it, but it's a kind of a bit old school. There are still some scraps in games. It's not uncommon. Whereas, when you get into the professional levels in Australia, particularly, like that's more or less been eliminated from the game. Yeah. So it can get a little bit tasty. And there's guys who don't take a step back. And I think in England, I don't know if this sounds a bit silly, but you kind of have a perception of French people as as one thing, but then the rugby league towns are something else entirely. These are tough, rough people who, like I said, if someone's in their face, they're not going to take a step backwards. And the kind of towns they're from are kind of semi-rural or industrial themselves. So it's kind of like, I'm sure, like, we're not to go into the history of French Rugby League through the 20th century, but it's a bit of an ugly history. So the places it survived are these kind of, no-nonsense towns where people have had to really fight to keep it alive. And that's very much in the DNA of the sport over here.
So looking at the league so far, we've 3 games in, aren't we, in Elite 1? How's the season unfolded so far?
Yeah, it's a bit, you alluded to, there's been a bit of a rebrand. So it was Elite 1 and now it's like Super Trez, Super 13. I'll be honest, I think I preferred Elite 1, but we'll park that one. So you've got a few teams that are, the finalists last year, Carcassonne and Albi, are going to be strong again. Limoux are always strong. Sant Esteve, which is Catalan Dragons reserve, I guess from their point of view, I'm sure they won't mind me saying this, but they're more of a like develop the talent kind of project to feed into the Super League squad than they are necessarily about winning the trophies in Elite One. Whereas, a lot of the other Elite One teams, they are Elite One teams and that's it.
Yeah.
But having said that, it looks like the early signs from Sant Esteve, Catalan Dragons reserve this year, is that they're going to be really competitive as well. Not that they haven't been competitive, but I think they've had more of an emphasis on bringing youth players through rather than like assembling the strongest squad possible. But they look like they're going to be really, a real kind of show of force this season. And they've got, I don't know if you caught it, they've got that rugby union convert, Lam, who came over from Montpellier, I believe it was, who's playing for them. So he's played, top level rugby union and is now playing in Elite One Super Tres competition. So, they should be a force to be reckoned with.
You mentioned, a player there just sort of switching union to league, and does that happen as often as it might do in the lower leagues in the UK, in France, or is it an abnormality really?
It does happen. What I'd say is like a lot, and this is going back to your question about what would surprise people about rugby league. Even though rugby league obviously doesn't have the footprint of rugby union, the towns that have like an Elite One team or even an Elite Two teams, a lot of those towns really are rugby league towns. So it's kind of weird. Like one of the towns where I lived is, postcard France. Like it's really lovely, beautiful place. Tourists come to it in the summer and have their photos taken in front of all the old buildings and stuff like that. But, you'll be walking down the street and see people wearing like a St. Helens jersey or Penrith Panthers jersey, which is just like really unusual. And especially after living in London for a few years, you would never see something like that. So I think like there is a bit of crossover, but like I said, the players that make up the Elite One teams are league players, and they have always been league players, from what I can tell. The towns that they've grown up in like what they call an école de rugby school from a very young age, and been all the way through the system up to adults. So they're not that crossing of the codes doesn't happen, but there is almost a kind of distinction between the league towns and the union towns in some parts of France.
It sounds like a really high quality competition. I'm interested to get a bit of an understanding why rugby league in France at national level hasn't really hit the heights it should do. Have you any ideas?
Well, we can get into the socioeconomic reasons, which probably hold rugby league back in the UK as well.
Yeah.
So much of it is historical. I'm sure you've touched on this on your podcast, but with the banning of rugby league during the Second World War under Vichy, and the kind of seizing of all of its assets, seizing all of its bank accounts, and that never coming back to the game. The places that rugby league exists now are in many cases the same places that rugby league was restarted after Vichy fell and after the Second World War. So it hasn't escaped that footprint very much, and that is, because of those historic reasons, because of those socioeconomic reasons. That said, it definitely is growing, and I think the impact of Catalan Dragons in Super League, is having an effect. And I think, as ever with these things, you were never going to see the results in the first 5 or even 10 years of Catalan Dragons' existence. This is, growing a sport like rugby league is a multi-generational project, especially like with the advent of new technologies, and rugby league is competing against more and more sports and more distractions, especially for young people. It's going to be a multi-generational project, but we are starting to see, people, especially with the Dragons being in the grand final Super League, that turned a few heads, and people started saying, "Oh, hang on, what's this? What's this sport that's going on over here?" And people discovering it on YouTube and saying, "Wow, this is an exciting sport." And I think from what I've seen, going back to your previous question about union players coming over to league, at the lower levels, you are seeing that a bit more, and you ask people why they fancied giving league a dig, and one of the most common answers is, they came across it on YouTube, and they might have been alienated by, some of the tackle law changes in rugby union, which some of the players that really enjoyed the physicality and really enjoyed the contact are now, this is just my impression, are now quite frustrated with rugby union, and are coming over to league to kind of get that back into their game and, rediscover the bits that they enjoyed. And I think, in both the UK and France, there is a kind of begrudging respect among rugby union cohorts for the intensity of league the physical demands of it. Like nobody shies away from the fact that league players run a lot more, they make a lot more tackles in a game, and it's just tougher on the lungs and tougher on the legs. And I think people know that. So, it does appeal to those people to who that appeals. But like I said, I think it's historical reasons that it is a bit more limited. But we are starting to see a bit more of a buzz because of the Dragons, and for that brief period that Toulouse were in Super League, I'd like to see them back in Super League with a bit more time to prepare their squads and a bit more infrastructure behind them. And I'm sure we'll start to, they'll start to be even a bit more momentum.
Yeah, what would a match day experience look like at this level in France?
It can get pretty tasty. Like I said, not the biggest crowds. And that's often a reflection of the areas that it's in. So it is the places that it survived after rugby league was banned are in these kind of quite small and often semi-rural towns. So while it might not be a big crowd, it might actually be quite a big percentage of the local town's population, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So you'll get, they've got decent facilities. Like most teams will have, a good complex to play on with a, good intact field and at least one big stand. Some of them stand on every side. That although it might not be the biggest crowd, there will be a good atmosphere. And like I said, because the comp is quite tasty on the field, it can get a little tasty off the field as well. And I don't mean that there's any trouble in the crowds or anything, but I mean that, you kind of get this little cauldron atmosphere, even though there's not an enormous crowd. And, people, especially when you get young players playing and their mates come from school and they're treating it like it's an Olympic Marseille match, and they're almost coming with like flares and, stuff like that. It's quite a cool atmosphere. But yeah, I guess, like I'm sure you've seen when you watch a Catalan Dragons game, a home game, like there's so much pressure on the ref, and they'll appeal every decision and shout for every offside and every potential high tackle. It's kind of similar to that. So not the biggest crowds, but a good atmosphere.
Liam, it's been ace talking to you about French Rugby League, mate. It's been insightful for me. It's something we want to learn more about.
Even more confirmation of just how tasty French Rugby League can get. So we've had a few people now sort of describe the match day experience in France. And it seems like it's a bit old school, but it
sounds like it's Workington v Barrow on steroids, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
But sounds interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and you never know. What I love about this is the fact that people get to travel through sport. You know what I mean? It's just another example. Liam over there, I think he went out on a bit of a limb and thought, right, I'm going to go and get over there and do something, stay in the game, and he's out there, south of France, living the dream now.
Yeah, great connection from London to the south of France as well, and people tell you rugby league don't exist outside of Yorkshire, Lancashire. Well, they're very much wrong, aren't they?
It does.